In the 6th year of our marriage, Tristan had an affair with Covet, the girl I had sponsored. The reason he gave was that he had developed a dual personality disorder. The main personality loved me as I was now, while the secondary personality loved Covet, who resembled me when I was 18 years old. It wasn't until Covet got pregnant that the cruel truth was revealed, and I had a huge argument with him. Tristan said casually, "The one who slept with Covet was the old me. The current me still loves you. Vivian, what are you dissatisfied with?" He have forgotten. In the past, in order to marry me, he knelt in front of his mother for a whole day and night. In my previous life, I couldn't accept the betrayal and was unwilling to get a divorce. In the end, I committed suicide due to depression. When I opened my eyes again, I looked at Tristan, who was trying to soothe me. "Let's get a divorce." Tristan's hand paused as he was putting a necklace around my neck. Then he casually fastened the clasp and looked at me in the mirror, saying, "Vivian, today is your birthday. Let's not talk about anything that spoils the mood." I met his gaze in the mirror. The room was dimly lit. Tristan, who had his arm loosely around my shoulder, had rolled up the cuffs of his shirt and was wearing a silver watch with chipped paint, which didn't match his noble temperament at all. It was a gift I gave him when I was 19 years old. It was a watch that cost just over 1,000 yuan. But Tristan, who had a net worth of hundreds of billions, had been wearing it for more than a decade. So in my previous life, even until I died, I couldn't understand why, after we had finally overcome all the hardships, he had an affair with Covet and even made up the absurd excuse of having a dual personality to deceive me. It was only when Covet got pregnant and wanted to take my place that the truth was exposed. I had a breakdown and had a huge argument with Tristan. But he was still so casual. "The one who slept with Covet was the old me. The current me still loves you. Vivian, what are you dissatisfied with?" How could I be satisfied? In the past, Tristan knelt for a whole day and night to get his mother's permission to marry me. He could have simply told me that he had cheated and we could have parted ways amicably. But he chose to deceive me like a fool. That's why in my previous life, I was unwilling to get a divorce and couldn't accept the betrayal. In the end, I committed suicide due to depression. The ridiculous thing was that when my blood stained the bed and I stopped breathing, Tristan was joyfully celebrating the first birthday of his and Covet's youngest son. In a trance, the dizziness from excessive blood loss in my previous life washed over me. I suppressed the sour and painful feeling in my chest. There's nothing about spoiling the mood. Just consider it as the last birthday gift you give me. Tristan, let's end it here. Tristan wasn't too surprised. Instead, he analyzed things clearly with me. "Vivian, if the news of our divorce spreads, it will be detrimental to the positive image of Huatai. The stock price will surely plummet, and for the several ongoing new projects, the investors will also consider withdrawing their investments. So getting a divorce now will do more harm than good for both of us." It was a truth I should have understood long ago. Someone like Tristan, from his background, was shrewder and more heartless than anyone else. He only gave 3/10 of his love and kept 7/10 for himself. In my previous life, the 3/10 of love I felt was just an illusion that made me fly into the fire and burn myself up. I looked at him calmly. "If you don't agree, I don't mind if tomorrow's entertainment headline is about the president of Huatai having an affair with a student sponsored by his wife, and making up the excuse of a personality disorder to deceive people. Are you threatening me? Anyway, it will all affect the stock price of Huatai in the end. Why shouldn't I choose the option that benefits me more?" Tristan was silent for a long time and finally agreed to the divorce. Before leaving, he looked back at me and smiled with the corner of his mouth raised, saying, as expected of the person I taught, "You've learned the skill of manipulating people's hearts to the fullest." Tristan was the most playful young master in our class. He came from an old wealthy family in Hong Kong. Relying on his good looks, he made countless girls flock to him. And I had just been admitted to a prestigious university in Shanghai that year, holding the few thousand yuan I earned from working in a factory, and with injuries all over my body, I escaped from the suffocating mountains. People from two different worlds had no intersection points at all. But I deliberately created that intersection point. That day, in a wine-selling club, Sister Q, the foreman, selected me and Ava to go to the private room on the top floor. When I pushed the door open, I immediately saw Rustan sitting in the corner. He was half leaning on the sofa, and his slender fingers with distinct knuckles were swirling a glass of wine. The ripples that spread out were like the beating of my heart. Halfway through, someone got drunk and started making inappropriate moves on Ava. She was so scared that she burst into tears. When the man was annoyed and was about to slap her, I raised my hand to stop him, my eyes full of stubborn determination. You took advantage of her first, and now you want to hit someone. Do you have no shame? The man was enraged and raised his other hand to slap me. Just then, a smiling voice sounded. What did this little sister say wrong? It was casual yet carried a sense of superiority. When I looked up, I met Tristan's half-smiling eyes. My heart skipped a beat. I knew I had won the bet. I also understood that my clumsy trick had been seen through by him. It was a carefully planned artificial accident, and it was hard to say who had the intention first. With the help of Tristan's influence, I worked hard to climb up, wanting to have a place for myself in this bustling metropolis. Tristan taught me the ways of the world personally and accompanied me to countless social occasions. In those years, Tristan and I took countless flights between Shanghai and Hong Kong, and the drawers were filled with plane tickets. We also went from just acting in the beginning to truly falling in love later. When Tristan introduced me to others, his way of addressing me gradually changed. My friend Vivian. My girlfriend Vivian. My wife Vivian. I took off the necklace and looked at myself in the mirror. Tristan was wrong about one thing. Taking off all the jewelry and designer brands and washing off the delicate makeup, I was still the same Vivian who came out of the mountains, feeling inferior and sensitive. That's why I ended my life in depression in my previous life. After all, it took me 10 years to become Mrs. Tristan. So how could I be willing to let go? It's not true to say that I have no regrets. But I also don't want to repeat the same mistakes. The legal team of Huatai, nicknamed the Invincible Team of Kowloon, quickly drew up the divorce agreement. The marital property would be divided equally, and Tristan would give me an alimony of 50 million yuan every year until my death, and this agreement would only be invalidated then. When the divorce agreement was handed to me, Tristan looked at me with a complicated expression and said, Vivian, this is my compensation to you. After being husband and wife for so many years, I've really let you down. The Hong Kong media often said that Tristan, the president of Huatai, was a typical ambitious man and was extremely good at psychological games and business negotiations. Just like now. As he spoke, a touch of scarlet gradually appeared at the corners of his eyes. Tristan was playing the emotional card with me, firmly believing that I would soften my heart. I have no objections. Let's sign it. I didn't hesitate to put my signature on it. Tristan looked at the signed divorce agreement and was slightly stunned. He didn't even feel the pain when the edge of the sharp paper cut his fingertip. He seemed unable to understand. Why was I able to leave him so easily and give up our 10-year relationship so resolutely? The divorce procedure in Hong Kong was complicated, and Tristan was a person who liked to play tricks. On the day of the court session, I drove to the court registry. As soon as I got out of the car, I saw Tristan and Covet standing at the door. Covet was wearing a white cotton dress with a knitted cardigan on top. From a distance, she somewhat resembled me. To be precise, she was like Vivian when I was 18 years old. She had the innocence of someone who hadn't experienced much of the world, with a hint of eager ambition in her ignorance. Sister Vivian, you don't mind if I accompany Tristan here, do you? Covet took Tristan's arm and looked at me with a triumphant and provocative look in her eyes. But I suddenly remembered the little girl who timidly called me sister. Because I came out of the mountains myself, I understood how unfair this seemingly peaceful world was. 2 girls from Puerarians. So I sponsored many girls to study. And Covet was one of them. Perhaps to make up for my younger self, I treated Covet like a younger sister. In all the occasions where I appeared, I would take her with me. Just like Tristan had taught me back then. I taught her how to socialize and deal with people bit by bit. And I hired teachers for her to learn etiquette knowledge. But I didn't know that the girl I treated like a younger sister Since she decided to come to Hong Kong to study, she had decided to replace me step by step and become the second Vivian. Even if I had known that at that time, I would have laughed at her for being delusional. But I had forgotten. Tristan liked girls like this the most. They seemed smart but were actually like a clean piece of paper, allowing him to paint his own colors on them. After all, wasn't I like that when I was 18 years old? Self-righteous. With a bit of small cleverness and boldness in my innocence. I had become his prey early on. After struggling for a lifetime, I ended up dying in depression. When Tristan saw that I remained silent, he shook off covet and reached out to hold my hand. Vivian, if you regret it, then we can just. I dodged his touch, glanced at covet's swollen belly, and said, what? Do you want your son to be a bastard? Covet looked at Tristan hesitantly. Tristan didn't even give her a side glance and stared straight at me. If you don't like it, just have an abortion. If you hate her, I'll immediately send someone to send her out of Hong Kong. Covet no longer had the haughtiness she had shown in front of me earlier. I didn't feel the pleasure of winning a battle. I even felt a bit of pity for Covet. Like the feeling of sorrow for the death of a rabbit, knowing that one's own fate might be similar. You can seek anything from Tristan, but never gamble on his wavering heart. In my previous life, I couldn't understand this. And now, Covet couldn't understand it either. The divorce judgment was soon issued. After coming out, Tristan was still in a daze and still couldn't understand. Vivian, I lied to you about having a dual personality because I didn't want you to be sad about my infidelity. But how could you be so heartless as to divorce me? And you were so decisive. I curled my lips mockingly and said, did I put a knife to your neck and force you to sleep with Covet? He remained silent. I had no intention of continuing to entangle with him and turned to walk outside. Tristan chased after me and asked, are you going to return to Shanghai next? It's none of your business. Just stay in Hong Kong. After all, you have nowhere else to go. He said to himself. In the future, for anything about you, just say a word, and I'll take care of it for you right away. His tone was as if he was certain that I would stay. But he had forgotten. Back then, I could give up everything I had worked hard for in Shanghai and stay in Hong Kong for him. Now, I can also leave resolutely. I turned back and looked at him with a cold expression. Tristan, I actually don't like Hong Kong at all. He didn't seem to understand what I said. But it didn't matter anymore. I turned around and walked away quickly. So quickly that Tristan tried to reach out and grab the hem of my dress. But his hand just swayed in the air feebly. And it froze my dress. In the end, he didn't catch anything. I drove away. In the rearview mirror, Covet and Tristan were arguing. I retracted my gaze and suddenly remembered the moment I found out that Tristan had cheated on me with Covet. At that time, I was crying so hard that my whole body was trembling. And I kept asking him why it had to be Covet. It could have been anyone. Why was it Covet, whom I regarded as my younger sister? So when Tristan lied to me that he had developed a dual personality disorder, I forced myself to believe it. I also knew how clumsy his excuse was at that time. But I was unwilling. I couldn't accept the double betrayal. Over time, I almost thought that he had really developed a personality disorder. Until the truth was revealed. I completely broke down. I was so reluctant that I didn't want to get a divorce even if it dragged on until I died. Because of my unwillingness. Because of my deep love. We had clearly overcome the opposition from his mother trying to break us up. And we had supported each other through the difficult times when Huatai was at a low ebb. We had finally reached the top of the pyramid together. And the happiness we had once longed for was within our reach. How could I be willing to let go? Sometimes when we were tired from arguing, I would also think of the year when Tristan cut off relations with his family for me. And I accompanied him during his entrepreneurship. That night, when Tristan got his first pot of gold, he was drunk and leaned on my shoulder, murmuring in a low voice, Vivian, I really want to marry you. No matter what the beginning was. But it was true that we fell in love when we were young. And it is also true that our true feelings have changed now. So after dealing with the follow-up matters in Hong Kong, I immediately boarded a flight back to Shanghai. When going through the security check, I subconsciously looked back. I couldn't tell what I was looking at. Was I looking at myself in the past life who was still unwilling even until death, or was I looking at the 10 years that were wasted on Tristan? In the end, I remembered the night when Tristan proposed to me. Tristan, who was so confident and capable in the shopping mall, had his fingers trembling when he opened the diamond ring box at that time. Vivian, stay here. Stay in Hong Kong. Marry me. And we'll live a good life together for the rest of our lives. Tristan, I actually don't like Hong Kong at all. But this is your home. And I was willing to stay for you. Now that we have gone our separate ways. Naturally, there is no need for me to stay anymore. So Tristan, it's time for me to leave. In this life, this is how far my love for you goes. Section ed article track. When she was Tristan's mistress in the past, Covet knew how to restrain herself and never dared to have the slightest connection with Tristan in public. When she saw Vivian, she would also take the initiative to walk around. Since Vivian divorced Tristan, she has been high profile and frequently entered and exited Tristan's private residence and company. As a result, all the entertainment headlines during this period were gossip news about her and Tristan. It is suspected that there is a marital breakdown between the Huatai couple, and the sponsored female student has become the interloper. Vivian's good deed turns out to be nourishing a tiger to invite trouble. And the female student is pregnant and trying to usurp the position, with a double kill? Vivian is heartbroken and flies to Shanghai. And the female student's repaying kindness turns into seizing power. As a result, the stock price of Huatai fell by several points in a row. And the employees of the public relations department stuck to their posts 24 hours a day. After being on the trending list again, Tristan's mother called to warn Tristan, I don't care how you fool around outside like your father. If the stock price still drops tomorrow, I will contact the board of directors to remove you from your position as CEO. After hearing this, Covet pursed her lips and apologized softly to Tristan. Tristan, I didn't mean to. It's just that you. She stroked her growing belly and became more confident. I'm getting closer and closer to giving birth. But you still won't marry me. So I was muddle-headed, and, marry you? Tristan lifted his eyelids and looked at Covet mockingly. The moment his eyes fell on her, Covet felt like a piece of goods that had been stripped naked and was being sized up by others. She stammered, I take the initiative to abort the child. And you can still stay by my side. If you have other thoughts. Tristan threw a check in her face. You won't get a single penny from me. Tristan. Covet let out a scream of disbelief. You were able to pretend to have a dual personality for me. And you were able to divorce Vivian for me. I don't believe. Her eyes were red, and tears kept falling. I don't believe. How can you be so heartless to me? Is that so? But you should know why I took a fancy to you. Covet's face turned pale. And she cried even harder. Tristan realized that she was actually nothing like Vivian. She wasn't as beautiful as Vivian. Nor was she as smart as Vivian. The only advantage she had was that she was young. But there were plenty of young girls. Covet meant nothing to the CEO of Huatai, who had tens of billions of assets. Similarly, the reason for divorcing Vivian wasn't because of her either. There were countless women throwing themselves at him. So, how could there be only one Vivian in his life? Seeing that Tristan didn't come to coax her, Covet was unwilling. The reason you won't marry me now is because of Vivian. Right? But Tristan, Vivian won't come back. So what if she comes back or not? Tristan didn't care at all. Or rather, even though Vivian had gone to Shanghai now, he was still certain that she would come back to Hong Kong. As long as Vivian was in Hong Kong. As long as he wanted. He had plenty of ways to make her change her mind, just like she did back then. After my work and life in Shanghai got back on track, I went back to Hong Kong to deal with the properties I left there. The day after I arrived in Hong Kong, Tristan's mother invited me to meet her. The meeting place was a very secluded clubhouse. When I arrived at the private room, Tristan's mother was already there. In her 50s. She was wearing a privately tailor-made cheongsam, exuding an elegant and noble temperament. You're here? She glanced at me. Her tone indifferent. Over the years of my marriage, Tristan's mother still didn't like me. In her opinion, neither my family background nor my speech and vision were worthy of the position of Mrs. Tristan. However, Over the years, it was also her who taught me hand in hand about the social interactions and interest entanglements in the wealthy families, and gradually brought me into the circle of Hong Kong socialites. Auntie. I sat down opposite her. Tristan's mother pushed a cup of steaming coffee in front of me. It was a cheese latte, which was to my taste. You really wasted all my teachings over the years. She scolded me. It's just a female student. Let her give birth to the child if she wants. As long as you're still Mrs. Tristan for a day. What can she do? But I don't want to make do. I took a sip of the latte and continued. Just like this cheese latte. If it doesn't suit my taste. After taking the first sip, I won't take a second one. I made the same mistake once in my previous life. And I won't make it again in this life. 9. She let out a soft sigh. She seemed to want to find some of the childish boldness of the little girl I used to be from my face. But all that was in my eyes was the vicissitudes of life. Actually, I had already expected that you two would come to this day. After a long time, Tristan's mother spoke. The day I found out that he had cheated. I asked him if he still remembered what he said when he knelt in front of me to marry you. He thought for a long time but couldn't answer a single word. But I remembered it very clearly. That year, Tristan cut off ties with his family in order to marry me. He said that he would marry no one but me in this life. He started from scratch for me, transferred all his properties to my name, and took me to Tansi Temple, in front of the Hall of the Gods and Buddhas. He made a promise, Vivian. I won't tell lies in front of the Hall of the Gods and Buddhas. I will only love you for the rest of my life. At that time, neither of us expected that the rest of his life, that Tristan talked about, would only last for a few short years. And we didn't even make it through the 7-year itch. I know better than anyone what kind of person my son is. His love for someone is just a momentary freshness. Once that freshness wears off, everything is gone. I just didn't expect that you would be so resolute in asking him for a divorce and leave Hong Kong alone. You did something that I have always wanted to do in my life, never dared to do. Tristan's mother's real name is Feng Shomi. Her ancestors were Chinese Americans and were extremely wealthy. She had a business marriage with Tristan's father in his early years. But they gradually developed feelings after marriage. The good times didn't last long. Tristan's father had mistresses outside. The couple had quarrels and arguments. In the end, Tristan's father passed away due to a serious illness. She resolutely dealt with those mistresses outside and helped Tristan take the position of CEO of Huatai. She also didn't mention divorce. Just like me in my previous life. As long as I didn't mention divorce and occupied the position of Mrs. Tristan for a lifetime, I would have won everything. Before we parted, she hugged me for the first time. Like a kind elder giving instructions to a junior who was about to go on a long journey. Now, as the chairwoman of Huatai, I still want to persuade you to remarry Tristan before the divorce news is made public. But as a woman, all I can say to you is that I failed to teach my son well. I also want to thank you. Without her cultivation over the years, I wouldn't have been able to become the independent Vivian I am now. Tristan's mother patted me on the back. Vivian, move forward and don't look back. He's not worth it. You deserve a broader life. After dealing with most of the properties in Hong Kong and entrusting an intermediary to sell the last property in my name, I was ready to go back to Shanghai. During this period, Tristan knew that I was selling my properties and tried to meet me several times when he had time. I refused to see him every time. He had no choice but to send me a message through someone. Vivian, you will understand that Hong Kong is your final destination. I ignored him and turned to board the flight back to Shanghai. I just didn't expect to meet Ashton on the plane. We hadn't seen each other for many years. The unruly and arrogant boy in my memory had shed his wildness and become calm and reserved. Only his dark eyebrows and eyes were as sharp as they were when he was young. Long time no see. He sat down beside me. The cold and strong aura on him instantly enveloped me, making me unable to move. Coming back to my senses, I smiled at him. Yes, having fulfilled my obsession. It's been a long time. In my junior year of college, I broke up with Tristan. He left me and went skiing in Hokkaido. For more than half a month. The female companions around him were all different. That's when Ashton appeared. among Tristan's circle of friends. He was the only one whose family background could match Tristan's. It was said that he grew up in Beijing and had a young master's temper. That night, it was raining heavily in Shanghai. The car I was driving broke down on the way. Ashton came to pick me up in the heavy rain and sent me back to my apartment. I stared at Ashton's eyebrows and eyes in the dark night, and my heart throbbed for a moment. I couldn't tell if it was love at first sight with a suspension bridge effect. Ashton held my face in both hands and pressed his nose against mine. His scorching breath made my face hot. He tempted me. And it was also like a confession. Vivian. Since you've broken up with Tristan, why don't you give it a try with me? I wasn't blind to the way Ashton looked at me during every party. But I also understood the principle of not being greedy. So I always kept a distance from Ashton. Until this moment, I was really tempted by him. With a bit of a vengeful attitude. I couldn't help but nod and agree. The news that I was with Ashton spread widely. Tristan immediately flew back to Shanghai from Hokkaido and got into a fight with Ashton downstairs in the college building. Ashton, you know damn well that Vivian is my girlfriend. Yet you still flirt with her. Do you even consider me your brother? The veins on Tristan's forehead bulged. And he punched Ashton in the face. Ashton had been sent to the army for special training by his father since he was a child. And Tristan was no match for him at all. Ashton punched back, grabbed the collar of Tristan's shirt with both hands, and looked at him with the same look as if he was looking at a dog. First, you and Vivian have already broken up. You're at most an ex-boyfriend. Second, if I didn't have a crush on Vivian, who the hell would want to be your brother? Damn it, the two of them started fighting again. This matter became known to everyone. And even Ashton's mother was alerted. She had me taken in for a conversation and forced me to break up with Ashton. Later, when Ashton came to find me, it was also a stormy night. He was caught in the rain, and the corners of his eyes were very red. Vivian, did you ever have feelings for me? Ashton, you should know that when I was with you, it was just to make Tristan jealous. So, I didn't dare to look into Ashton's eyes. And my throat felt a bit dry. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Ashton's back gradually bend, as if all his pride had been drained away. The answer doesn't matter. So what? I didn't say anything and calmly raised my eyes. Ashton looked at me for a long time. The corners of his eyes became redder and redder. And his eyes grew colder and colder. Vivian, do you see me as a backup? What answered him was a long silence. I don't really remember what else happened that night. I only remember that the rain kept falling that night. Perhaps it was because of a guilty conscience. Or maybe for some other reason. Ashton and I gradually lost touch. And I got back together with Tristan. Until the year I got married. Ashton asked our mutual friend to give me a C. Hewitt Traditional Courtyard house in Beijing. During the short journey, Ashton and I didn't talk to each other again. It wasn't until we came out of the airport terminal that he called out to me. I turned around. Ashton stood in the bustling crowd. The sunlight shone from diagonally behind, and the stray hair on his forehead cast a shadow between his eyebrows. I couldn't see his expression clearly, but I knew that I was in his eyes at that moment. Over the years, my phone number has never changed. I understood what he meant by that. But I didn't answer. I just smiled politely and said goodbye to him. After returning to Shanghai, my time was completely occupied by work. Occasionally, having fulfilled my inside, when I had some free time, I would always run into Ashton. We didn't have much contact with each other, but the timing of his appearance was always just right. Just like a week ago, I was invited to participate in an electronic technology exhibition in Shenzhen. On the way back, the car broke down halfway, and it was Ashton who arrived before the rescue team. For the first time, he talked to me about the past and mentioned that stormy night. I just smiled and didn't say anything. I felt a bit guilty. Ashton's Adam's apple moved, and he glanced at me out of the corner of his eye. In the end, he remained silent. I vaguely heard a sigh in the air. When getting out of the car, he was smoking a cigarette, slowly exhaling the smoke, and his voice was filled with desolation. Vivian, I'm not worse than Tristan. Am I? After the smoke dissipated, I met a pair of self-deprecating black eyes. and my throat felt as if it was blocked by something, making it feel dry. After a long time, I could only say one sentence. Ashton. You don't have to do this. With Ashton's family background, he could choose any girl he liked. He didn't have to waste any more time on me. The important thing is, I don't have a second life to gamble on a relationship with an unknown ending. I also don't have the courage I had back then to take a desperate gamble on love. After that day, I didn't see Ashton again. And next time I saw him was 2 months later. At a private banquet in the YNEU hall. Ashton was wearing a well-tailored black suit. His noble temperament carried a hint of casualness. And he looked even more handsome than he did 2 months ago. I was talking to a business partner at that time and didn't notice him walking towards me. When I turned around, I met those pitch-black eyes. Shall we have a chat? He asked me. I followed Ashton to the terrace. In the distance, the row upon row of tall buildings were reflected in the sparkling river surface. Ashton got straight to the point. Vivian, I'm here tonight because of you. I opened my mouth, about to speak. But when I looked into the man's powerful and straightforward eyes, I finally asked a bit helplessly, what exactly do you love about me? Do you love my beautiful appearance? But people will always grow old. Do you love those false qualities that I deliberately packaged? But those are all fake. Ashton almost immediately answered this question. Do I need a reason? Because you are Vivian. I saw Ashton's thin lips opening and closing, emitting a deep and pleasant voice. Of course I know that you are worldly, hypocritical, and even a bit unscrupulous in some ways. But I just like you. Everything seemed to fall silent at that moment. Only the sound of my heartbeats like a drum remained. After a long time, just as I was about to speak, a half-smiling and mocking voice sounded behind me. It seems that I came at the wrong time? I looked in the direction of the sound. Tristan was standing behind me, his eyes cold. When we first got divorced, Tristan didn't really take it seriously. He was certain that Vivian wouldn't leave Hong Kong, as long as he turned back and, like he did in the past, just crooked his finger a little, he could coax her back. But everything that happened later gradually deviated from the track. Vivian disposed of her industries in Hong Kong that she had built up over the years, and then went back to Shanghai. In the past 6 months, she hadn't come back to Hong Kong even once. What really made Tristan realize that things had completely gotten out of his control was half a month ago. In the early morning of Vivian's birthday. That day, Tristan had attended a dinner party and drank a lot of wine. His assistant helped him into the car and respectfully asked, Tristan, Kava tasked me to ask you if you want to go back to the apartment on Boshan Road tonight? The address that blurted out of his mouth was one that even he didn't expect. Tai Po Market. That was the apartment in the suburbs where he could only afford to live when he started his business. Later, when he earned his first pot of gold, he bought this apartment. When Tristan came to his senses, he was already sitting on the sofa in the apartment. The small apartment of more than 10 square meters was decorated just like it was yesterday. Even the cactus that Vivian had planted on the balcony had bloomed. It seemed that in the next second, Vivian would run out of the bedroom with the light on and hug him, saying happily, Tristan, you're back. The bedroom with the light on didn't have the light on. And Vivian was gone. Tristan pressed his tired eyebrows and thought that he should be too tired recently and needed to take a break for a while. The clock on the wall pointed to 12 o'clock. Tristan lit a cigarette. At the same time, a message popped up in his private email. He leisurely clicked it open. His own voice sounded in the empty room. It was a program he wrote on a whim 7 years ago, reminding him not to forget to love Vivian. If there are no accidents. This year is the 13th year since we met. Tristan. Remember that today is her birthday, and say happy birthday to her. Also, Alcado, tell her that you love her very much. At the end of that message, it was the young him asking himself, Tristan, did you marry Vivian this year? I married her. But we got divorced. Tristan's hand trembled, and the falling ashes burned his fingertips. He suddenly realized, no matter how young and beautiful those girls outside were, the only person he could truly love was Vivian. Tristan thought he should go to Shanghai to bring his only love back home. The night flowed between us, and the swaying neon lights divided the narrow terrace into 2 worlds. Tristan and I were clearly separated. Tristan squinted his eyes and beckoned to me. Vivian. Come here. I ignored him and was about to leave. Tristan grabbed my wrist. And his voice carried a thin layer of anger. Vivian. You should know that I came to this banquet because of you. Tristan wasn't on the invitation list for this private dinner party. But in order to bring Vivian back to Hong Kong, he used his connections to get an invitation. Counting the 13 years they had known each other. Apart from Vivian, no other woman had ever made him care so much. Is that so? I used a clever trick to break free from his grip and said sarcastically. Is Tristan a person who forgets things easily because of his high status? Do I need to remind you that we're already divorced? Jane, before Tristan could say anything, I left without looking back. Ashton chased after me. When he passed by Tristan, his steps stopped for a moment. And his eyes issued a warning. Tristan. Stay away from her. When their eyes met, there seemed to be sparks flying in the air. Tristan had never taken Ashton, a former loser, seriously. Back then, he could make Ashton's mother intervene to break them up, and he could do the same to step on Ashton again now. After all, Vivian was with him just out of spite. Looking at how distant they were in their current interaction, he was still the one in control of the situation. But he just didn't like Ashton being around Vivian. Whether it was in the past or now, I should be the one reminding you. Tristan casually unbuttoned and his cufflinks. Ashton. Stay away from Vivian. She's mine. How shameless. Ashton didn't hide his mockery. You cheated first and then lied to her. Why do you think Vivian will come back to you? Because she loves me. The fact that Vivian could give up everything she had worked hard for in Shanghai and follow him to settle in Hong Kong was enough to show that in her heart, he was in the first place. But you've forgotten one thing. Ashton said meaningfully. Once Vivian decides on something, she won't change her mind. Tristan's confident expression froze. When they first met that year, he was smoking and teasing her with others. This girl is prettier than a Miss Hong Kong. It's a pity that she has a stubborn temper and won't change her mind once she's decided on something. Back then, Vivian could take a desperate gamble and accompany him to Hong Kong. Now that they were separated, she dared to give up everything in Hong Kong and leave far away. This everything also included him. Ashton walked past Tristan and lightly patted his shoulder. Don't be angry. Ex-husband. Ashton. Tristan whirred angrily. Ashton didn't care at all and slowly left a sentence. When we get married, we'll definitely set up a separate table for you. In the few days after the banquet, I would always run into Tristan either in the elevator of the apartment or in the reception room of the company. I ignored him. And he wasn't angry either. The jewelry and flowers he sent every day were all different. Once, the newly recruited assistant couldn't help asking me, President Vivian, Tristan really seems to have realized his mistake. Why don't you give him another chance? The little assistant had just turned 20 this year and hadn't graduated from university yet. Her eyes carried the unique clarity of her age. Do you know what's the most trustworthy thing in this world? What? I closed the document in my hand and pointed at Tristan, who was having a phone conference, and said, a man who has cheated will really correct his mistakes. There are only two situations for cheating, once and countless times. Tristan tried to talk to me several times, but I walked past him without looking sideways, completely ignoring him. He probably was determined to win me back. Once, when I was having a meal with Ashton, he also followed. I lost my appetite and made an excuse to go to the restroom to touch up my makeup. When I came back, Tristan blocked me in the corridor. Tristan used a coaxing tone, but his voice contained a threat. Vivian. You've been angry with me for so many days. It's time for you to come back with me. Isn't it? Tristan. If you have any sense of shame, don't show up in front of me again. I had already let go of my unwillingness. But I always hated him. I hated him for being heartless and unrighteous. And I hated him for cheating on me and lying to me. Are you still bothered by covet? He smiled. Vivian. Before coming to Shanghai, I had someone send covet abroad. And as for the baby in her belly, I also took care of it. As for children, as long as you come back to me, we will definitely have them. I had already learned about Covet's fate from Tristan's mother. Before hanging up the phone, the woman who had been decisive and tough for many years had endless sadness in her sigh. My son is really not a good person. Vivian. You were right to divorce him. Tristan was truly not a good person. It's just a pity that it cost me my life to realize that. He reached out to hold my hand. So, Vivian, come back with me. Don't force me to do something to you. I took a step back and stared at him coldly. Tristan, I think I've made myself clear enough. Between us, it's not that if you lower your head and admit your mistake, I'll just pretend that nothing happened. I heard about your company, he said meaningfully, pausing deliberately and looking at me with a half smile. Perhaps the Vivian at 18 or 19 would have been afraid of such a threat, but with the connections and funds I had accumulated over the years, I no longer took Tristan's threats seriously. Do whatever you want. It's just a company. I'm not short of that money either. Ashton was waiting for me at the end of the corridor, holding my shoulder bag in his hand. I walked over quickly. Tristan stood there, watching me run towards Ashton. Ashton glanced in his direction. Just like that glance many years ago. His eyes were indifferent. Not taking Tristan seriously at all. Watching our receding figures. The gloom in Tristan's eyes grew stronger. On this day, Hanin Thofilwa and Session, Assistant Tang, who had been with Tristan's mother for decades, called me. He said that Tristan's mother was ill and in the hospital and wanted to see me. He asked me when I would be free to go to Hong Kong. Remembering Tristan's mother's teachings over the years, I finished my work and immediately booked a flight to Hong Kong, thinking of Tristan's methods. I was on my guard. I sent a message to Ashton in advance. If I didn't contact him that night, he should come to Hong Kong to find me. Just after getting off the plane, the car that was supposed to pick me up didn't arrive. Instead, a black Mercedes-Benz with a familiar license plate stopped in front of me. Tristan Lainlet, dressed in a black suit, got out of the car and opened the car door for me in a gentlemanly manner. He raised his hand to check the time. He was still wearing the watch I gave him on his wrist. He looked at me affectionately and said, "There are still 40 minutes until the scheduled registration time. If we go now, we can just finish the formalities." A wash of nameless flared up in me, and I threw my handbag at his face. "Tristan, are you crazy? You tricked me into coming to Hong Kong in such a roundabout way. Do you really think I'll be touched? I just feel disgusted." I turned around and was about to leave. Tristan reached out and pulled me back. I raised my hand to slap him, but he held my hands tightly, bent down, picked me up, and threw me into the back seat of the car. The partition rose, and the space in the back seat was narrow. I tried to get up several times, but Tristan pressed me back down. "Let go." There was a red mark on his forehead from where I hit him, and his eyes looked menacing. "Do you think Ashton will come to take you away? Vivian, don't forget. I'm a businessman. Businessmen never do business without certainty." The moment her plane took off, Ashton's mother was already ready to send people to tie him back to Beijing. "He's probably on his way home now." I stared at him with red eyes. "Tristan, you really make me feel disgusted." Tristan grabbed my chin and bent down to kiss me. "When we remarry, you'll eventually regain the feeling of loving me back then." I bit his tiger's mouth hard, and the taste of iron filled my mouth. Tristan let go of me in pain. I took the opportunity to break free from his hold and tried to push the other car door, only to find that it was locked. I could only grit my teeth and stare at Tristan. "Tristan, do you know why I insisted on divorcing you?" The unwillingness from my previous life and the hatred at this moment overwhelmed me, and tears fell directly onto Tristan's hand. "Because I've already wasted my whole life on you." "Why? Why do you still want me to waste another lifetime on you?" While Tristan was stunned, I quietly dialed Tristan's mother's phone number. In the end, Tristan didn't take me to the registration office. Instead, he took me back to the apartment in Tai Po Market. He was trying to play the emotional card with me again. "Vivian, I know I'm sorry for you, but I've already sent Covet away. And I'm willing to start over with you. Why can't you forgive me? Is it because of Ashton?" No. I was sitting on the sofa, and Tristan was kneeling on one knee on the floor. I looked down at him. Do you really want me to forgive you? There was a glimmer of excitement in his eyes. Yes. Then can you die once? I said this mercilessly. You see, in the previous life, because of your infidelity, I committed suicide due to depression and lost my life. You can just die once for me. Consider it repaying me my life. And then we'll be even. And I'll forgive you. Tristan was speechless at my words. The locked apartment door was kicked open with a bang. Tristan's mother walked out from behind the bodyguards. Looking at her son kneeling on the floor. Her brows were furrowed so tightly that they could crush a mosquito. Tristan looked at her like a savior. Mom, having fulfilled my obsession. Please help me persuade her to agree to remarry me. Tristan's mother sneered. You were the one who was so determined to marry Vivian back then. And you were the one who cheated later. Now you're the one begging for a remarriage. I always thought you were like me. Now that I think about it. You're really just like your damned father. Mom. Tristan wanted to refute. Tristan's mother interrupted him. Vivian. I'm sorry to have scared you today. It's my fault for not teaching my son well. I'll have the car ready to send you to the airport now. The way she addressed me showed that she knew exactly what to say. I stood up and followed the bodyguard outside. Vivian. Tristan tried to catch up. But Tristan's mother told the bodyguard to stop him. I didn't pause for a moment. Tristan broke free from the bodyguard. The watch band on his wrist loose and then fell to the ground with a bang. The watch face shattered into pieces. And the minute hand stopped moving. It was completely broken. Tristan bent down and reached out with trembling hands to pick up the watch. It cut open on his fingertip from the glass. And the stinging pain spread. The pain made his heart feel suffocated. At this moment, Tristan's mind flashed back to Vivian lying on the bed, with a blank look in her eyes. And without hesitation, she slit her wrist with a dagger. Blood flowed out and quickly stained the bedsheet tread. He saw that beautiful and pretty face gradually turn pale and transparent. And there was no more breath. At the same time, in the hotel auditorium, he was holding Kavat's shoulder and celebrating his youngest son's first birthday with a group of guests. Tristan's mother rubbed her forehead. Tristan. If you act foolishly again, I don't mind immediately replacing the CEO of Huatai. After all, you'd have plenty of siblings. Tristan slowly raised his head. His eyes were extremely red. Mom, having fulfilled my obsession, I won't act foolishly anymore. He had already caused Vivian to waste a lifetime. He couldn't let her waste another lifetime. But I'm still not willing. Tristan's mother looked at her disheartened and son and closed her eyes in annoyance. She really wished she could just not see him. After coming out of the elevator, I saw Ashton, who had rushed here in a hurry. We looked at each other for a moment, and then he walked towards me, reached out, and hugged me tightly in his arms. He murmured softly, "Fortunately, having fulfilled me. This time I didn't let you down." The softest part of my heart was touched. I looked up at him. Ashton, will you stay in Shanghai in the future? Yes. He answered almost immediately. I didn't ask any more questions. Instead, I took the initiative to hold his hand. I vaguely felt that his fingertips were trembling slightly. The night we acquired the land in the southern suburbs, Ashton and I officially announced our relationship. It was also on this night that Tristan had a car accident. Tristan's mother rushed to the hospital as soon as she heard the news and blocked all related reports. However, news about Tristan's injury still spread everywhere. When the news came out, there was a lot of discussion on the internet. Most people said that he had the car accident because he was too heartbroken to see that I had a new relationship. At a party a month later, Ava told me about this. It is said that Tristan will be a eunuch from now on. Fortunately, having fulfilled among his many lovers, one of them gave birth to a son. Now Tristan's mother is completely focused on her grandson and doesn't care whether Tristan is dead or alive. She couldn't help but sigh. I really thought that you and Tristan could make it to the end. I really thought so too. The reality is that no matter how deep the relationship is, it can't withstand temptation. Ashton called and said he was downstairs. I replied okay and picked up my handbag to leave. Adi asked me, "Do you really plan to continue with Ashton?" "Why not?" I replied with a smile. I ran towards Ashton, who had been waiting for me for a long time. He opened his arms and caught me before I reached him. There's no need to mention how our past was. And it doesn't matter what the future holds. Just focus on the present. Just the present. Anyway, for me, the result of love is always the same in the end. It's better to just enjoy the process. The end.